Perhaps I've spent a little too much time listening to classic rock. As I've been reflecting on the Apostle Paul's missionary journeys recently, the song Ramblin Man by the Allman Brothers keeps running through my head. Paul's father was no gambler down in Georgia. Greyhound buses weren't even invented yet. And of course, the apostle wasn't born a Ramblin' Man. But the argument could certainly be made that he was reborn as one. When you look at Paul's ministry, from Barnabas's recruiting trip in Tarsus and that fateful prayer meeting in Antioch, through to his arrival in Corinth, what is he? He's on the road. I hesitate a little to say rambling because there was certainly purpose to it, God's direction in it. But nonetheless, according to some timelines, it was roughly 5 years of straight travel. The conclusion of the time, it's as if the script was flipped. And he spends roughly the next 5 years in just two locations, Corinth and then Ephesus. Because Paul spent such a significant amount of time in Corinth compared to some of the other churches, I want to take a short detour into his letter to the Corinthians to see how Paul characterized his time there. In chapter 3, he chooses two metaphors to describe his work, one pertaining to farming and one to building. In the farming metaphor, Paul suggests, what then is Apollos? What is Paul? Servants through whom you came to believe, as the Lord assigned to each. I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. And we'll meet Apollos near the end of Acts chapter 18. But for now, the point is that while the two have differing ministry assignments, it's the same God behind all of it. Moving from farmer to builder, Paul says, according to the grace of God given me, like a skilled master builder, I laid a foundation, and someone else is building on it. Each builder must choose with care how to build on it. For no one can lay any foundation other than the one that has been laid. That foundation is Jesus Christ. Now, lest we be unclear the kind of house being built, Paul says in verse 16, do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you? If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy that person. For God's temple is holy and you are that temple. And that's pretty obvious, isn't it? The house is God's house, the temple. In the Gospels, the disciples were called to be fishers of men. Here in Corinthians, Paul articulates his understanding of his role as that of a temple builder. Not a physical temple, but as we see throughout the New Testament, a temple built from God's people on Christ the cornerstone. Now, Paul was not the only builder in Corinth. And in a sense, his letter is very much directed to those other builders. His critique and his warning to those other builders is that they are building on something other than Christ. We don't know who these other builders are, but we know he's not talking about Peter or Apollos, as he's already mentioned being of common cause with them. Paul's message in Corinth is summed up pretty succinctly in chapter 2. When I came to you, brothers and sisters, did not come proclaiming the mystery of God to you in lofty words or wisdom. For I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. That's Paul's message and foundation. As we read Corinthians, his foundation has implications for his actions and his attitude. If his foundation was Christ crucified, then suffering for the gospel was to be expected. And an attitude of humility was required. On the other hand, we don't necessarily know what the other builders took as their foundation. It seems like it has something to do with the pursuit of worldly wisdom. The action it leads to was boasting, and the attitude, arrogance. I know Paul's words are written to a church and church leaders, but it's worth taking a moment this week simply to reflect on your foundation. What is your life built on? If you're not certain, look to your attitude and your actions, because whatever it's built on, it's made evident in those places. Now, I pray that we would follow Paul's example, and together we would be a house built on a firm foundation.